Namaste, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us for this explainer. Today, we're taking a fascinating journey into the very blueprints of life. We are breaking down the chapter on evolution from the genetics unit, and I am absolutely thrilled to present this beautifully structured visual analysis brought to you by Wheel of Knowledge by Dr. Navaid Akbar. This explainer is designed to make these complex evolutionary concepts exceptionally clear, using large, correctly labeled visuals. So, get comfortable and let's decode the history of life on Earth together. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to journey from the big, macro story of natural selection all the way down to the micro math of population genetics. Let's just dive right in. Section 1. Origin and Natural Selection. We've got to start at the very foundation of evolutionary biology. How do organisms actually adapt to survive in what is often a highly competitive, hostile environment? How does nature decide who thrives and who perishes? Well, it follows 5 highly logical steps. First up, variation, because no two individuals in a population are exactly alike. Second is overproduction. Organisms just tend to produce more offspring than the environment can realistically support, and that naturally leads to step 3, an intense struggle for existence over limited resources like food and space. Step 4 is the famous one, survival of the fittest, where those with the most favorable adaptations win the struggle. And finally, reproduction. The survivors live long enough to pass those winning traits down to the next generation. You can actually see these concepts in action right here. Look at the beetles on the top left. Initially, there's variation, right? Green and red beetles. But as birds spot and eat the red ones more easily, the green ones suddenly have a massive survival advantage. Over generations, that favorable green variation increases. And below that, we have the absolute classic example, industrial melanism in the peppered moth. Before industrialization, light-colored moths were perfectly camouflaged against tree trunks. But once factory smoke darkened those trunks, the dark-colored moths suddenly had the advantage. Nature literally selected the darker traits for survival. It's brilliant. Part 2. The tree of life. So once these traits are selected over incredibly long periods of time, they don't just change a single population. They begin to map out a historical lineage over millions of years. Charles Darwin introduced this core concept alongside natural selection called branching descent. It's the pattern where organisms with a common ancestor diverge over time to form completely new species. Think of it like a grand biological family tree where every single branch represents a totally new evolutionary path. The crucial takeaway here is that this pattern proves all living organisms are deeply connected. As we move upwards on this tree, the branches show diversification. And the rule of thumb is super simple to remember. The more recent the common ancestor, the more closely related the species are. For instance, if you look at our own history, humans, chimps, gorillas, and orangutans share a much more recent common ancestor with each other than we do with, say, other mammals. We're grouped closely on the exact same major branch. Section 3. Convergent versus divergent evolution. As life branches out, species inevitably run into different environments. Or sometimes completely unrelated species encounter the exact same environmental challenges. This brings us to a really fascinating structural comparison, where we have to carefully distinguish between two very different things. On one hand, you have homologous structures. These are body parts that evolved from a common ancestor, so they share the same basic internal structure, but they've adapted to do completely different jobs. That's divergent evolution. On the flip side, we have analogous structures. These are totally different internal structures that evolved independently in unrelated species to do the exact same job, and that is convergent evolution. Check out the divergent evolution on the left side of this diagram. The human arm, a lizard's leg, a whale's flipper, and a bat's wing. They all share the exact same underlying bone structure inherited from a common ancestor. They just diverge to grasp, walk, swim, or fly. But on the right, under convergent evolution, look at the wings of a bird, a bat, and an insect. An insect wing has no bones at all. They have entirely different structural origins, but they converged purely for the shared biological function of flight. It's like nature solving the exact same problem in completely different ways. Part 4. Adaptive radiation. Now that we understand how structures adapt, let's look at a really specific, rapid type of divergent evolution that happens when a new, untouched habitat is colonized. It's called adaptive radiation. This is the evolution of diverse species from a single common ancestor when that original population colonizes new, varied ecological niches.
Imagine one species arriving on a completely isolated island, finding tons of different unused resources. The species rapidly diversifies to use all of them, which creates a huge diversity of species in a relatively short evolutionary time frame.
And here are two of the most legendary examples of this in the real world. On the left, Darwin's finches from the Galapagos Islands. A single ancestral seed-eating finch arrived there and radiated outward into multiple distinct species. Each one evolved a specialized beak perfectly suited for a different diet, like a stout beak for crushing seeds or a slender beak for extracting insects. On the right, the Australian marsupials. From one common ancestral marsupial, a massive variety evolved, from the digging wombat to the hopping kangaroo to the flying sugar glider, each one perfectly adapted to its own niche on the isolated Australian continent. Section 5. The Hardy Weinberg Principle. Up to this point, we've been looking at the grand visual evidence of evolution. But to really understand the mechanics, we've got to drill down into the mathematical laws governing genetic changes at the population level. Enter the Hardy Weinberg Principle. This basically states that in a given population, the frequency of alleles, the variant forms of a gene, remains totally stable and constant from generation to generation, as long as there are no outside evolutionary influences. This state of stability is only ever disrupted by 5 specific forces: gene migration, random genetic drift, mutations, genetic recombination, and of course, natural selection. Focus right on the center of this infographic. That equation, p squared plus 2pq plus q squared equals 1, that is essentially a mathematical model of a population where absolutely zero evolution is happening. It represents perfect genetic equilibrium. So when biologists measure a real population and find that the allele frequencies don't add up to this perfect one, it proves that evolution is actively occurring. Evolution is literally defined here as the disturbance of this mathematical equilibrium by the factors you see around it, like a sudden mutation or genetic bottleneck. And finally, part 6, the wheel of knowledge. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, from the majestic branching of the tree of life all the way down to the elegant math of genetic equilibrium. A huge, heartfelt thank you to Wheel of Knowledge by Dr. Naved Akbar for making this explainer possible. His work really allows us to clearly visualize the invisible forces of nature. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought derived straight from the Hardy Weinberg principle. Evolution only occurs when equilibrium is disturbed. So if human actions, things like pollution, climate change, and habitat destruction, are currently disturbing the natural equilibrium of our planet at record speeds, what dramatic, unprecedented evolutionary changes are we triggering in the natural world right now? Thank you so much for learning with us, and keep questioning the world around you.